Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Tim has so graciously introduced me, I'm Air Commodore Nigel Wharmby, known to everyone by my nickname of Wham. That's a long story. It's well outside the scope of what tonight's presentation is about, but we can happily come back to that at the end if you want. Some of you, those who are suckers for punishment, may have heard a presentation very similar to this before, as I've delivered it previously to the Friends of Ullswater group. Tim has kindly invited me back tonight in order to apologise for my first effort and to do better this time. I remember when I stood up last time in the Glenridding Village Hall, I described the feeling as being more nervous than hurtling up the Ullswater Valley at 250 feet and 420 knots. For those that think maybe I won't be as nervous this time, think again. I have a script that I have to refer to for several reasons: advancing age, to prevent me digressing too much, and so that I keep to the time limit which Tim has given me. But if you wish me to digress afterwards, perhaps about having to eject from a Harrier, we can do that too. This evening, my time is yours. My background or pedigree for doing this, as you've heard, is that I've been a fighter pilot in the Air Force now for 47 years, and some would say it's high time I retired. But as Maverick would say in the remake of that film Top Gun 2, that's as may be, General, just not today. My career started in November 1979 on Manchester and Salford University Air Squadron, before many of the audience tonight were perhaps born. And as my final tour of duty, it's perhaps fitting that I've come full circle and I'm now teaching another generation of aspiring RAF pilots on the Northumbria and Yorkshire Universities Air Squadron, and also the air cadets from across the whole north of England at RAF Leeming. But I'm also a member of your local community, and I planted my roots here some 8 years ago in Patterdale, from where, as Tim has said, I commute to Leeming each week. As a member of that community, who witnesses the speed and noise of military aircraft that use the lakes for their training on a daily basis, both RAF and from other NATO nations, and also as one who regularly delivers that noise in the fells, I wanted to deliver a presentation to highlight to you, in a little more detail perhaps, what it is that we do and why we do it. After all, we don't regularly get the opportunity to do this in public very often. I've been asked to speak for no longer than 45 minutes, so that's where there'll be plenty of time afterwards to ask questions. With that in mind, I would ask that you do save any burning questions to the end. I will try and keep my abbreviations to a minimum, and that will prevent me straying off the subject and keeping you here longer than intended. So, without further ado, the scope of my presentation this evening, I intend to discuss the requirement for military low flying, how we train and practice to meet that requirement, the demands, both physical and mental, and the hazards we face routinely in that low-level environment. I'll then go on to highlight the levels of oversight, scrutiny, and regulation that ensure low flying is conducted safely and effectively with due regard for those around us, you, the general public. I'll also emphasise a computer system known as CADS, more of which later, which serves as one of the many means of airspace deconfliction to also enhance that safety. In the final section, I'll take you to a typical mission planning chronology to break out the timeline and the tasks required to prepare for and deliver a typical low-level training mission, possibly tomorrow in the lakes. Because the bit you see of a singleton or a tactical formation of military aircraft is only the very tip of the iceberg in terms of the effort required to put those jets in the right place at the right time to deliver the training effect that's required. In terms of the public face of military low flying, what better way of giving you a brief oversight of the task than this short 2-minute video clip from Terry Abraham's award-winning documentary, Helvellyn, a year in the life of the mountain.
What's it like to low fly? 50 miles an hour through the Lake District? It's pretty exhilarating, right? So I've been doing this for 40 years. Low flying is something that's a very perishable skill. Low flying over level terrain is one skill, but low flying through mountainous terrain where you're manoeuvring the aircraft at high G around some very steep corners is a completely separate skill, and particularly when you're flying at the formation. Role in the Air Force with the RAF, so the Cluster Squadron, so we provide operational support to the front line, primarily to our Typhoons and to our F-35 Lightnings, where we act as an adversary aircraft that might act on fighter and provide them with whatever Cluster Squadron they want. That then they use.
So, on this slide, there are two photographs separated by exactly 80 years. The top one, as I'm sure you'll recognise, is a Möhne Dam in the Ruhr Valley in Germany, breached by 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters, during Operation Chastise on the night of 16-17 May 1943. And a similar view of the dam some 80 years later from my cockpit during a 100 Squadron training detachment in the area. The dam busters were required to navigate with rudimentary instruments in total darkness, save for moonlight, at altitudes as low as 60 to 100 feet, to deliver their payload with incredible precision and timing. Very little has changed in the intervening 80 years, I have to tell you. Yes, we have GPS to aid our navigation, but the Hawk in particular has remarkably similar flight and navigation instruments to its World War II counterparts. And whereas the Lancaster had a crew of 7 to fight its way to the target and deliver those weapons, our modern fighter jets are single crew, single seat, and aided in some instances by some fairly early generation computer avionics. Low-level flying is an essential activity for delivering military effect, whether that's a show of force in Afghanistan or delivery of laser-guided ordnance in support of troops on the ground. It's particularly relevant in what we would describe as a contested air environment, where our adversary has some very capable surface-to-air weapon systems that can pick off high-flying targets with ease. Just ask those who've been flying recent air combat missions over Ukraine right now. But it's also a very perishable skill, as it's the most demanding environment, most mentally and physically, to operate an aircraft, to defend myself, and to deliver offensive firepower, often by night and in precise coordination with other elements. Being at low level provides terrain masking. Missile and gun fire control radars require line of sight. If I can deny them that line of sight by flying low enough, I can defeat their tracking solution on me. By flying low, I also minimize my exposure to those same systems, and I give them less time to acquire a firing solution on me. It also delivers a huge element of surprise, to which I'm sure those of you that have suddenly been confronted by a fast jet whilst you're in the fells and you weren't expecting will definitely testify. Low flying also degrades an adversary's weapon system ability to be able to predict an accurate firing solution, particularly if I can maneuver aggressively in 3 dimensions while they're trying to track me. So for all these reasons, the ability to deliver weapons accurately and on time from a low-level delivery profile is essential. We may not always have the luxury to be able to deliver from medium or high level, as we've done in some recent conflicts. From the Argentinian and the RAF low-level tactics we used in the Falklands to the manned delivery profiles that are currently being flown in Ukraine, I would argue we have actually come full circle. So after describing the environment, the potential threat, and the demands of operating fast jet at low level, often at high G, I hope you can see why training and practice are actually crucial to preserve safety and to remain competent. You wouldn't place a go-kart driver behind the wheel of a Formula One racing car and ask him to push that Formula One racing car to its very limits on his first ever lap. Not at least if you want to see him complete the lap and come back with a serviceable racing car. We use the phrase aviate, navigate, and communicate as a mantra in training for our students as an absolute order of priority. We fly the aircraft first, then worry about accurate navigation, and then worry about telling someone else your intent. The requirement to be able to multitask, which I'm regularly told we blokes are not good at, is paramount. It is a very high workload environment to prioritize correctly, requiring rapid decision-making and the ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances, even in the training environment. And as you'll see later, we intend to stretch the capacity of our students and ourselves to ensure that we are able to react to unexpected events rapidly and effectively. If you throw into that mix that the highest flying and navigation demands are presented by mountainous terrain, when we're flying at up to 480 miles an hour or covering 1 mile every 7 seconds, as in the last video clip, and potentially leading a formation of other aircraft, it's a testing time, and we focus that training into specific low-flying training areas, of which clearly the Lake District is one, and I'll expand on that a little bit later. So, to summarise the demands of the low-level operating environment, it requires considerable anticipation to remain at least 1 step ahead of the aircraft, and demanding levels of accuracy, both in positioning the aircraft and making a time over target, for which we are expected to achieve plus or minus 5 seconds using a paper map and a stopwatch without GPS. Balancing aircraft performance with reducing fuel levels and the need to deviate around poor weather, a common factor obviously in the UK, which can take you miles off your pre-planned route and use up precious amounts of fuel that you just don't have. These all necessitate a degree of mental agility and the rapid decision-making, which becomes even more complicated when you're responsible for other members of the formation that you might be leading. And in all of this, safety is absolutely paramount, especially in the training environment. And it comes back to that phrase, fly the aircraft first. If everything starts to go wrong, and it occasionally does, as you'll see shortly in a video clip, we can abandon the training objectives and decide on an alternate course of action, hopefully quite quickly. Just fly the aircraft first and deal with the unexpected as you do. So, given everything I've said so far, I hope you can see that skill fade in this domain is actually an ever-present challenge, and we're required to meet stringent levels of currency to be assessed as competent, with regular checks being performed on each of us and by flying instructors such as myself on others to demonstrate that level of competence. I don't need to tell you that inclement weather is not uncommon in the UK, and especially here in the Lake District. It presents a particular challenge and hazard for low-level flying. I can fly safely in cloud just like an airliner, but not below a specific height known as our safety altitude. And we have the whole of the UK divided up into sectors where the height of the highest obstacle is known. For flight around the Lake District, that height is based on Highest object in the Lake District? Nikki? Scarfell Pike, exactly. And on top of that, we add a further 2,000-foot buffer that keeps us clear of terrain when necessary. My aim is always to avoid areas of bad weather if I'm at low level, either fly around them or in the worst case, climb rapidly to escape above safety altitude to then continue the mission elsewhere. Otherwise, we risk what we know as controlled flight into terrain, or CFIT. A granite rock facing cloud is always going to win. So disorientation is also going to be a major hazard, whether that's disorientation because we are temporarily uncertain of our position geographically, we got lost, or resulting from poor navigation or being taken off our pre-planned track. And as an instructor, I will take my students off track all the time to test their skills at getting back to where they should be. The much more hazardous term is spatial disorientation, which is an aviation medicine subject in its own right. The human brain relies to a huge extent on the information that's presented by your eyes of the outside world. Deprive the brain of that stimulus by unexpectedly flying into cloud at low level and then instantaneously performing a high energy maneuver to clear the rock face will cause false sensations of the true horizon due to your balance organs in your inner ear becoming confused. As a result, we're subject to periodic spatial awareness training, and we learn to recover the aircraft from unexpected attitudes by rapidly transferring to our aircraft instruments from visual flying. Mid-air collision is thankfully an extremely rare event in modern aviation. We have many procedures, rules, and regulations to prevent such events. But at the end of the day, at low level, I am navigating visually with Mark 1 eyeball with the overriding principle of see and avoid the other aircraft that are out there. By far the biggest risk is one of bird strike, which is an ever-present hazard. Again, there are measures and rules in place to mitigate the risk, such as complete avoidance of areas that are known to have high concentrations of birds, be that permanent or seasonal. Also flying no longer than is necessary to achieve the training task and minimizing the amount of time spent in that environment. Colliding with a bird at high speed at low level does nothing good for that bird. And even worse, it will cause catastrophic damage to both the airframe and the engine and potentially the air crew. The short video clip I'm about to play that you can see from my cockpit here is set in the wash weapons area in the sea just off the Norfolk coast and not the Lake District, where we used to practice regularly live air-to-ground weapon delivery. The big sort of lozenge in the middle is actually a sump called the plug, which is actually in the middle of the wash water, and you can see the Hunstanton and Lincolnshire coast just below the gun sight in the back of the film. I've got a student in my front seat who's actually flying the aircraft, and we're about to commence our last weapons pass before returning through the airways to RAF Valley on Anglesey. My call sign is Victor 45. We're at 500 feet, and as we turn the corner, the student will commence a high G descending turn to an attack height of less than 150 feet above the water. However, as you're about to see, things change rapidly.
Loads of times when you really start to be like it's
Right. So in that event, the aircraft suffered multiple bird strike from, we think, 7 seagulls to both the airframe, the canopy, and more importantly, 3 went down the engine, which didn't do the engine much good. Our forward visibility was reduced to 0 because of the bird remains covering both the windscreen in the front seat and the intercockpit blast shield between us. We bottomed out at approximately 100 feet above the water, so about half the height of a regular pylon, after I took control. And 4 minutes 30 after the impact, we landed the aircraft safely at RAF Marham in Norfolk, but having to fly the whole route below 1,000 feet on instruments with the smell of cooking seagulls coming through the airframe, reminding us that the engine wasn't going to last much longer. And that's the consequence of a bird strike. So as you can see, we don't underestimate the risk of low-level flying, and we do everything we can to mitigate those risks in terms of time in the environment, the heights that we fly, and the areas that we use. The risk is still incredibly low, partially as a result of the mitigation measures, since the consequences are severe, ranging from financial cost, reduced operational effectiveness, resulting from having the aircraft unserviceable for a considerable period of time. In the more extreme case, we risk the loss of the aircraft completely, and worse still, potentially the loss of the crew. I tell you all of this in the hope that you'll recognise operational low flying is not an environment that we perform for the fun of it. It's an essential skill to provide options for weapon delivery in particular circumstances where survival against hostile threats preclude any other delivery method. But due to the demands of that environment, it's a very perishable skill that requires considerable training to become proficient and then to maintain that proficiency thereafter. So having described the task, the environment, all these challenges, I want to go on now just to highlight the means by which we regulate operations in the low-flying environment. As I mentioned earlier, the UK low-flying system is highly regulated. There are limits placed on the total number of aircraft that are able to use it at any one time, and there's a centralised booking system to manage its utilisation. The whole country is divided into specific areas that are bounded, and the details of each area, together with the restrictions, permanent avoidances, prohibited areas and hazards, are all detailed in our UK Military Low-Flying Handbook, with a chapter specific to each area. The Lake District happens to be low-flying area 17, which you can see depicted on the chart behind me, together with one of the pages of restrictions, medical, industrial and environmental establishments that we must avoid by given heights and distances. In certain areas where there are choke points, we even have a one-way flow arrow system, such as over Lake Windermere, Ullswater and Thirlmere, where we can only fly south to north at low level. Such restrictions, unfortunately, do not apply to civilian traffic. We do, however, all operate on the same common low-level frequency, and we can report our position entering and leaving the area and at specific points within the area. This aids any required deconfliction with essential services such as the Coast Guard search and rescue helicopters, who by necessity regularly need to fly against the flow arrow system. This chart, or this slide, shows part of our low-flying chart, and in this case, it's obviously Cumbria. You can see the low-flying arrow up Thirlmere, the one that goes up around Ullswater. You can see the medical avoid at Keswick, and all these little circles, these little cheeses, are all the microlite and the hang glider and parascending sites that we again have to avoid. Before flying, we will download an electronic version of this chart annotated with the specific route we planned onto the aircraft's mission computer, and we will also carry a printed version such that if we suffer an equipment failure or an electrical failure, we can still continue to fly the route with a paper map and my wristwatch. As part of our planning process for each mission or sortie, we'll also load our precise route onto a computer system known as CADS, or the Centralized Airspace Distribution System, before we walk, and ideally as early as possible in the mission planning stage. This network system allows any military unit to see who else is planning to use the system, their timings, and where and when they intend to be in the low-flying system. It's clever enough to let us fly or run a speeded up fly-through to highlight an alarm at any point of confliction along our anticipated route where my track may cross somebody else's. In the simplest case, I could obviously bring forward my takeoff time or delay to remove the confliction, or I can replan that portion so as not to conflict at all. It also provides contact details of the other unit so that we can physically chat through the options to remove our confliction. So it's a great planning tool, but it still does not remove the need for eyes on stalks, and the see and avoid principle still applies, especially if someone happens to be late or deviates for weather, generating new conflictions, possibly with other units. When I submit my route to the centralized low-flying booking cell, they will then scrutinize it again for timings and these conflictions before I'm hopefully allocated a specific low-level booking number. Without that number, I am not allowed to enter the UK's low-flying system. The system also retains a permanent record of my mission, such that if in the future somebody were to contact the low-flying cell with a complaint, perhaps because of excessive noise disruption, an animal's been spooked or something similar, my mission can be traced and an investigation launched into me and the circumstances of what I was doing and whether it was within the rules and commensurate with the low-flying discipline. NOTAMs and Royal Flights. NOTAMs are notices to airmen. I've already described the content of the low-flying handbook and our maps in terms of being able to highlight permanent restrictions, but clearly there are a host of temporary restrictions or events that require protection and avoidance. As an example, a large agricultural show or perhaps a gliding competition. These are published daily and updated as required and will appear both on a wallboard in the ops room, manually plotted, and also on our electronic planning systems such that we can plan to avoid them by a designated margin. Royal flights are also promulgated each day, and special corridors are inserted whether at high level in the airways or at low level in respect of a Royal helicopter flight. These again, all military aircrew are required to have signed for before launching, and of course we also have to avoid these corridors for specific time periods whilst we're airborne. I should stress here that NOTAMs are mandatory instructions for military aircrew, whether they be warnings or avoidances, but are only advisory for the civilian community. So, for the very last bit of the talk, for those of you who are still awake, I want to introduce you to the mission planning cycle, because for every hour that's spent on a mission, there will be probably 3 to 4 hours planning and briefing that sortie, and then another period of mission debriefing there afterwards. Who can tell me the location of the photograph and the identity of the two metal figures? It's Lincoln Minster, so that's Lincoln in the distance. The guy with the glasses on the left is Sir Barnes Wallis, inventor of the bouncing bomb and the designer of the Wellington bomber. And the guy to our right, his left, is Wing Commander Guy Gibson, leader, obviously, of the Dam Busters. If they came into my squadron planning room today to witness the planning process that I conduct, they would recognise it immediately. Yes, we now plan with the aid of a mission computer, and we have computerised ballistic tables to help calculate weapon trajectories and weapons effects, but the process and the principles don't change. The challenges and hazards we have today remain exactly the same as they were in 1943. And just as in their day, we will constantly strive to develop new technology, to employ new tactics and procedures, such as GPS and laser guidance for weapon accuracy and effectiveness. So now you can share with me a typical mission planning cycle. It doesn't matter whether this is a training mission in the UK or an operational sortie in an operational theatre of war. We always plan and train exactly as we mean to fight, so that there is little difference when we have to do it for real. So we'll start at takeoff minus 3 hours. So we've got 3 hours to plan this mission. The first thing we'll receive is an electronic air tasking order from our tasking authority. And the first thing I have to do as the mission leader is to determine if the task is actually achievable in the timescale, and do I have sufficient resource at my disposal to deliver it? What other assets are available to me to support my mission in terms of perhaps air-to-air tanker support, airborne early warning, electronic or hard kill jamming assets, fighter cover? What are their call signs? What frequencies are they on? Where will they be, and what coordination do I need with them? How much fuel can the air-to-air tanker offload to my formation? And where is his racetrack? Not being able to locate the tanker when you pull out of low level in Iraq at night can be an eye-watering moment to which I can testify from personal experience. I need to have a detailed weather brief as to what to expect at takeoff, in transit, in the target area, and at all my contingency diversion airfields. And with all these thoughts in my mind, I will then divide the planning requirements amongst my fellow formation members for them to complete. We're now 30 minutes in, and with all my earlier questions starting to be addressed, we need to actually start the plan. What NOTAMs might affect the route? These might be country shows or hang gliding competitions during peacetime training, but on an operational mission, they might be the positions of hostile surface-to-air missile batteries or known hostile radar sites, for which I'd expect a specified updated intelligence brief. I will look carefully at weapon to target matching to ensure proportional but effective delivery of effect, whilst minimising collateral damage and fratricide. I will also have to consider the attack profile. Do we need to deliver from low level, or can we achieve the same task from medium level? Do I require simultaneous or staggered weapons delivery from all players? Do I need a variety of weapons on the aircraft between the formation? What separation do I need between each aircraft over the target? How do we get together again off target? What threats, either ground or airborne, can I expect to have to evade or kill approaching and off target? How do I minimize those threats or permanently neutralize them? Much of this detail will be supported by accurate target imagery and a detailed pre-planned threat assessment. I then need to determine the line of attack, known as our initial point or IP to target run. And I'll probably require a different approach direction from each formation member to aid their own survivability, particularly in a high threat environment. Once I've decided that overall game plan, I'll leave another formation member to fettle the detail and finesse the IP to target plan on a 50,000 map, exactly the same Ordnance Survey maps that you use for your leisure walking. Having planned the IP to target run, I next need to look at the general route to the target area, taking into account weather and all the hazards that we've already spoken about. Only once I've decided a general route will I then delegate the detailed planning of that element to another member of my formation. All this planning data and routing then has to be uploaded electronically to our aircraft mission computers with paper backup printouts in case we have equipment failure or some form of electrical problem. And finally, we will upload the whole route to the CADS distribution system I talked about earlier so that we can check that we're not likely to conflict with another mission. And if we do, some last-minute tweaks to deconflict our routes. This flow and deconfliction is as applicable on an operational mission in theatre as it is on a training mission in the UK tomorrow. During World War II, up to a third of our Allied losses were due to accidents, technical issues, and mid-air collisions. So it's not just a peacetime constraint. We've only got an hour left now. Got a bit less than that here. We need to have finished the plan. It's time that we need to brief the mission. I'll start by giving an overview of the task and the intelligence and threat assessment. During the planning stage, each formation member has been completing specific tasks that I've allocated to him or her, and they won't necessarily be privy to the overall picture that I have of each element of the mission. So it's vital now that the whole team understands the overall plan. After all, if my aircraft goes unserviceable, which happens, one of them as my deputy is going to lead this mission in my stead. I then need to brief the domestics, the timings, the startup, taxi and takeoff profile, the fuel plan, which is usually extremely tight, and the expected weather and formation en route. I will then brief the route in detail with particular emphasis on the ingress and egress from the target area, and finally, the IP to target plan, which is the reason we're delivering this mission in the first place. So it's always the last piece of information that I brief, as it's the critical part which must be fresh in everyone's mind as we walk. So that's the brief out of the way. We've now only got 30 minutes to take off. My brief won't take more than 30 minutes, and so we're now assembled at the ops desk in front of the authorising officer, who will be another experienced pilot who isn't flying on the mission, to deliver what's known as an outbrief, which is there to ensure, as an external audit really, that we have covered every aspect, that everyone knows the task and their involvement, to be allocated our aircraft, updated on any changes to the weather, the runway, the diversions, since we started planning over 2 hours ago. Once he is happy that we are in good order, he will let us sign the authorization sheets and walk for our aircraft. With 15 minutes to take off, we'll have conducted our individual aircraft walk-round checks, loaded the mission computers, and the formation will be sat listening to the radio silently, waiting for my formation check-in call and to start engines. And if it's going to happen, I have to say, this is normally the stage where one of the formation members will call up with an aircraft problem and have to literally run for a spare aircraft, playing catch-up. We'll then taxi out and get airborne as a formation. So we're now into the execution. Our intent on this mission is to deliver precision effect, weapons on target, on time, without collateral damage or fratricide, and importantly, to provide video evidence afterwards that we prosecuted an accurate attack on a legitimate target. The next clip highlights 2 different types of attacks from my Harrier with different munitions matched to those specific targets, just to give you an idea of what that mission planning has actually delivered. As I say, it's taken from a Harrier, so it's a few years ago now. The first targets are artillery pieces, Serbian, that were shelling a civilian marketplace in Mostar. And the second attack shows 2 laser-guided munitions from my Harrier striking a bridge behind enemy lines that was being used to bring forward the enemy's ammunition for the weapons that we attacked in the first strike. So we've flown the mission, We've delivered the weapon successfully. We've destroyed the task target without inflicting any non-combatant casualties. But it's not over yet. Having signed the aircraft back into the engineers, we now need to in-brief and provide intelligence feedback, particularly if we encountered something that we hadn't expected or briefed. We have to conduct a telephone or video debrief with all our supporting assets, the tanker, the fighter sweep, etc., who may be from other coalition nations and based remotely from where we're located. We then debrief our own internal formation domestics. There is no rank in the debrief. Some of the individuals that are flying as my subordinate elements could be more senior to me in rank, but equally, they may have screwed up in some way, hopefully very minor, in which case we'll discuss it politely and firmly. We'll work out why it happened, and I'll make sure they don't do it again. We will also have our videos from the weapon strikes, which will be analysed to ensure that the attack was successful and to assess the target damage results. Ideally, we do not want to have to prosecute the same target a second time. All this we will piece together as learning points. We're never too proud to admit our own errors, which otherwise might go unnoticed, because that way others may not need to replicate those errors on subsequent missions. After 47 years doing this, I have yet to fly a sortie, particularly a complicated mission, where I couldn't have done something a little different or a little better. Every day is a school day. So that's it. I've tried to give you a feel of what we are practicing when you see an aircraft thundering up Windermere or Ullswater, or indeed anywhere else that you encounter low-flying military aircraft in the UK. The guys are not just out there having a good time. It's all in preparation for those occasions when we are called upon to do it for real. It's not a skill that you can simply pick up and run with on day one without repeated regular training. It's a potentially hazardous environment, and we do everything we can to mitigate those risks through regular training. It's highly scrutinised, and it's bound by extremely tight rules and regulations to ensure that when we are called upon to do it for real, we are well prepared, we are extremely competent, and we're a force to be reckoned with against any adversary out there. Thank you. That's all I have. "15 seconds early." Questions? Do you want to run it?
Anyone need to recover for a moment, just to get it all sink in? The first time I heard this, I was completely bewildered. I mean, mind-boggling that anyone can take on the sort of responsibilities and then carry them out. And I'm just wondering, from my own perspective, you hear about artificial intelligence replacing humans with robots and so on. And since so much is dependent on your equipment and your skills and so on, I'm wondering whether, to put humans through this is a huge task, and presumably there's all sorts of thoughts going on at the moment on trying to see to what extent you can replace humans with pilot with I just wanted to start the process. Are there ideas out there to try to take some of the burden off the humans and put these controls in the hands of machines?
Definitely. I think AI is obviously a way of the future. We already have numerous unmanned air systems which we can control from the ground to go and drop a weapon on the target and come back. But there is a distinct lack of flexibility. There is only so much you can do with an unmanned air system. If it's remote and it's got AI or it's got artificial intelligence linked with it, then does it have the flexibility to do what you want? We have numerous examples of aircraft being shot down inadvertently by artificial systems. Look at the F-18s out that was shot down by Kuwait recently, by Kuwaiti automated air systems. Fantastic, but they made some massive mistakes. So there's a time and a place where a manned person in the cockpit is always going to achieve more than that artificial system. Equally, for some fairly rudimentary tasks, I would argue, why put a man in harm's, or women, why put a human in harm's way if it can be done by a drone? And we see, when we look at what's happening, particularly in the Russia-Ukraine conflict at the moment, a massive use of drones for putting weapons onto targets, but a lot of them are very, very inaccurate, and you need a large amount of them to actually deliver the effect, whereas you put one Harrier over a target in Bosnia, and with 2 bombs, I will guarantee to take out the bridge for you. Or I'll come home without dropping if I don't need to. So there's a balance to be struck, and that balance is definitely growing, and we will see a lot more unmanned air systems and artificial intelligence coming into future conflict than we've seen in the past. But equally, I would argue that just as we maybe 10 years ago thought, we're never going to do a low-level mission anymore, we're not going to do that for war, we're always going to have air supremacy, and we're always going to have no one shooting back at us when we go and drop our weapons. Ask the Russians what they think about going over Ukraine, where they thought they would generate air supremacy on day one. They haven't got it now, 3 years later. And so they're finding that actually to put a manned system in the air at all is very risky, certainly not at medium or high level. And the only way a manned system will get through in that environment will be at low level, and probably extremely low level. So yes, it's definitely coming, it's definitely on its way, and there's a place for it.
So it's you. Please.
How far is it the pilots got to move from the start of the order and all that? What sort of aviation developments?
Sorry.
I'll just repeat the question for the people on the Zoomers. So the question was, I think, how far into their career before they're able to take on this sort of training?
It's changed. It's taken a lot longer. When I went through flying training, I graduated from university in July. 3 years to the day later, I was combat ready in West Germany, facing East Germany. So 3 years it took me. There are guys now going through flying training who are taking 5 and 6 years. The system now is smaller. What we ask of people is more intense. So the system has changed, but equally there are choke points in the system. We don't have the money, the resource that we had when I went through to get people through as quickly as we did. So somebody on the front line, if you were talking to a Typhoon pilot at the moment, it'd probably take him 5 years to get to the front line. And then once we get to the squadron, you will then be doing a workup on the squadron as well. So you're looking at maybe up to another year before he is competent in all the bits that squadron does. The big difference between what we do and what the American colleagues would do is our American colleagues will teach people to be a wingman first. And they'll spend an entire tour flying in welded wing on their leader. We don't do that. We get the guy combat ready. You can now lead it. So I can put a junior guy right at the head of an 8-ship formation. Yes, he will have much more experienced guys within the formation with him, but we generate that, should we say, self-discipline, that competency much earlier in the way we do it. But you're talking 5 years before somebody's going to end up on the front line.
What sort of age have got really
Yeah.
these speeds?
But also when you see the things we're seeing outside now, when you see the hawks that fly down along Ullswater and that, the guys are doing their flying training. Before they've ever done that in a hawk, they would have done it in much slower aeroplanes. So there's very much a graduated thing. Day one, he's not flying a hawk. You know, day one, he'll be in a tutor flying at 120 knots, and he'll be learning all these skills. He'll then go on to the next stage up, and he'll go to Valley, and he'll be flying one of their Texans, and he'll be flying it more quickly. The demands will be greater, but he'll learn to fly the aeroplane and then operate that aeroplane as though it were a war platform, even though you're never going to send that to war. And then he'll switch onto the Hawk, and then he'll be doing it at 420 knots, potentially up to 500 knots. And we will develop that building block approach such by the time he then gets selected to go to the Typhoon or to the F-35, he's got significant experience. And guess what? He'll go to the Typhoon and he'll do a convex workup all over again on a new type of aeroplane, which is much more complex, fantastic avionics, fantastic weapon system. He's got to learn how to use all of that before we're then putting him into this environment in that particular aircraft. So very much a graduated system.
You train pilots on the Typhoon, or is it F-35 now?
Both Typhoon and F-35. So we have the F-35s based at Marham in Norfolk. We have effectively 2 squadrons there. Notionally, one is Navy, one is Royal Air Force, but in effect, it's a force. And we started this concept when we were flying the Harrier, where the Navy and the Air Force effectively just became a joint force, rather than being, well, that's a Navy squadron, that's an RAF squadron. So you've got the F-35s based at Marham, and you have the Typhoons based at Coningsby and at Lossiemouth. So Coningsby in Lincolnshire, where the conversion unit is on some of the squadrons, and then the remainder of the squadrons are up at Lossiemouth in the north of Scotland. So F-35 and Typhoon are a balance of our frontline forces now in terms of fast jets.
At the back, yes, please.
How many pilots are there in the UK at the moment that are capable of doing
Goal. That's a very good question. You're probably talking, in terms of fast jet now, you're probably talking in the order of about 150. It's a very small force. When I joined the Air Force back in 1981, there were 125,000 people, not just aircrew, a total, 125,000 people in the Air Force. There's now about 30,000. So we're a quarter of the size we were. We are busier than ever, and we're smaller than the cadre of the Air Cadets now. Yes.
Controversial question, is that enough?
Sorry?
It is a controversial question, is that enough?
Well, we come, yeah, well, we come back to what we've just been talking about in terms of the ability of computers, the ability of unmanned air systems and that. Got an unmanned air system, most of them still need somebody to fly it. So we're quite stretched, I would argue, and I think quite often we punch above our weight. There are times where you'll see in the press that, well, if this happens, we'll just send another squadron. And we in the Air Force sat there going, oh yeah, where's that other squadron coming from? So we do end up being multitasked. And the problem with being multitasked is the role in one operational theatre could be a completely different role from what we're doing somewhere else. So we've got to try and be competent in all those roles. And that's not so easy. We call it a multi-role fighter. Well, it might be a multi-role aircraft, but the pilot's got to also be multi-role as well. And that's where, as you condense down to a very capable platform, do you have enough people to fly it that can do all the things? It is an emotive question. I would always say we need to be bigger. Hey, I'm 66 and they won't let me retire. So clearly there's something out there that says, you know, we need to keep some of these old buggers.
I read somewhere the other day that you have 47 F-35s. How many of them are working?
Okay, yeah, 47 is probably the fleet. I don't know the exact number, but if 47 is the fleet, some of those aircraft will always be going through deep maintenance. There is a scheduled period they're coming through. So, you know, we could probably put, at a guess, I'd say half of those aeroplanes would be available to go and do an operation tomorrow as our max capability. But we don't have any spares there. That's taking every aircraft out to theatre. So yes, fantastic piece of equipment, but they're very expensive. So we can't afford quite as many as maybe we would have done in the days of the Hawker Hunter or even the days of the Harrier. Yeah, it's a small number.
I've got 2 more politically sensitive questions. The first one is, there's been a continuing debate about what type of, what are the best fighters in the world? Are the ones made by America or other places? What, you know, is the relative merits of and the choices that this government makes in terms of whether you buy something which is made in Britain or made somewhere else? How is such a decision taken in the current situation where so many issues are bound up in the political environment, where you have to cooperate with people in a certain way, or is it in technical terms, certain types of planes are better quality from your perspective as someone trained to use them in harm's way, as it were, compared to others? How much of that issue is there? And the second question, maybe linked to that, is that at one stage I was involved in discussions about European solidarity and different air forces coming together and sharing assets and how you pool resources and why do the different countries in Europe have different systems and how do you get it more efficient and so on. I wonder, in the current climate at the moment, whether there's a more interest in that area now to ensure interoperability and all the rest of it, how you try to focus on certain types of aircraft or tanks or whatever it is compared to the case for complexity and diversity at the moment.
In answer to your first question, I think the F-35 is probably a perfect example of the technology required now in a modern air system is such that no one country has all the expertise in all the areas. You look at the number of people who have bought the F-35 and it's widely sold both in the conventional variant, CTOL, the ship-going variant but with conventional takeoff and landing, so catapult launch and arrested landings on the deck, to the Stovall variant, which we have, which is almost, in some ways, a derivative of the Harrier, that it can do a short takeoff off a ramped deck on a carrier, and it can do a vertical landing back on board. Now, those three types are selling around the world in various guises, and if you were to look at the components of those aeroplanes, a lot of the very expensive components are designed and built in the UK. A lot of the components are designed and built in the States. A lot of the components are designed and built in other European nations, and they're all brought together in a composite airframe that we all want to have. Now, clearly, some people can afford more bits than others. They can afford more of them. They can afford more technological avionics in the aircraft. But the aircraft itself is very much a conglomeration in terms of the way it's been built and the way it's been operated. But within that, and this comes back to your next question about can we share other people's aeroplanes, you're always going to have national sovereignty, the UK sovereignty. We want to know that the aeroplane we have, we can operate and it will fit in with our, shall we say, UK only eyes stuff that we might not want other people to know about. And most of the countries out there have exactly the same. There'll be things that go, well, this is for our eyes only. You're not allowed to see it. So how do you then put that into an aircraft which is a multi-agency platform? We can do it, and we do it, and the F-35 is a perfect example. There will be bits on some of the nation's aircraft that we would not be allowed to know about because it's their national security and it's their national sovereignty, UK sovereignty in our case, of what we want. When it comes to using other people's aircraft, we've looked at it, we do it in terms of our air-to-air tankers. There's a company called Air Tanker who actually lease out the aeroplanes effectively to the Royal Air Force to use as tankers. And if they're not being used as tankers for the Royal Air Force, they could be doing commercial type flying. But it's something which is in its infancy that you use other aircraft for things. We sat there, if you look at Bryce Norton not that many years ago, we would have VC-10s on the ground, we'd have TriStars on the ground, and one would argue we didn't necessarily get the best utilisation out of those aeroplanes. They could have been doing other stuff. Equally, if you look at the NATO AWACS system, the airborne early warning, the ones with a great big dish on the dome on the top that you can see operating out of Waddington quite regularly, they were a NATO asset. So they didn't belong to a particular country, they belonged to NATO. So that is, again, a shared asset. So it does happen, but I'd have to say when the chips are down, the UK will say, we want guaranteed ownership or use of those assets. And if another country says, well, I'm really sorry, we want to use them this week, well, you can't. So, you know, you're then down to how small is the fleet such that you can satisfy all the nations that have got their finger in the pie. So I think you always have national aircraft there.
Any Zoomer questions?
Just got one that asks specifically why the Lake District is such a vital training ground in the army.
Why it's such a
Why it's such a vital training
vital?
ground?
Yeah. We're a small country, so if I want to go low flying and do low flying training, I will go either to the north coast of Scotland, up into the Highlands. I will go to the Lake District, or I will potentially go into the Yorkshire Dales, North Wales, into Snowdonia. So those are the three main areas where we can actually do what we would call true mountain flying. For somewhere like Leaming, the Lake District is 10 minutes flying time from North Yorkshire. It takes me a bit longer to get to Wales. The Hawks from Valley will regularly use North Wales, and they will use the Lake District because, again, they'll come across Morecambe Bay. From north of Scotland, the Typhoons in Lossiemouth will regularly go into the Highlands because it's on their doorstep. We use a lot of fuel getting to our low-level training areas. A typical Hawk sortie will be an hour long. If I have to spend 40 minutes transiting up to the north of Scotland and back, and it's only going to give me 20 minutes on task to teach my student, that's not really best value for money from the aeroplane. But if Lake District is 10 minutes away, I can have 50 minutes of training with that student. So the Lake District is incredibly valuable to us, both from North Yorkshire stations like Leaming and from Valley on Anglesey, where it's only 10 minutes hop across the water. So it's proximity to the air bases, if you like, that make it a use.
Is he or she satisfied?
Not what I need.
Yes, we've got some more questions. Sorry. Yes, yeah.
Do you have any experience on aircraft carriers?
Yes, from the Harrier days. Yeah, from days flying the Harrier. Not knowing who's on Zoom, I maybe shouldn't go too far into this one. But we as Air Force pilots are there to deliver an offensive ground attack task. Being on board the carrier sometimes can be wasted time for us in terms of our training value, because the Navy will operate the carrier. It's a fighting ship, and the aircraft on board are part of that fighting system. But because they're part of a fighting system, the ship might be doing anti-submarine warfare. It might be involved in some other part of an exercise where we don't need the aeroplanes. So we'd be sat on board as Air Force pilots going, I want to get airborne, I want to go and do something. Well, you can't today because we're engaged in another operation. So they used to have a different mentality. Now that we're involved with F-35, which is an incredible capable platform, whether it be on land or from the sea, as I say, the two squadrons now at Marham are pretty much one large force, and they will operate equally from land or sea. And they will need to practice. The maritime environment is, again, a bit like doing UK low level here. Flying in a maritime environment is hazardous. It's a challenging business which needs specific preparation. So we would always end up having to go on board for a couple of weeks at a time just to gain our sea capability. And then that's it, we would dump it. All right, I got that now. I'm going to go back to doing my low-level overland tasking. So it's a bit of both. More integrated now than I think it's ever been in the past.
Let's take another two questions. Yes, yeah.
You mentioned a great pace, you mentioned the 3 hours pre planning, which you mentioned in outside that beautifully. Does that go out the window when you're so-called scrambled to go and sit on the wings over there?
No. For a pre-planned attack mission where I'm going to attack a ground target, that will require that 3 hour planning window to plan it and fly it, and then another hour when we come back. The sorts of things that we do with no planning, and I'll go back to something like time in Bosnia, we would have a thing called GCAS, Ground Alert Close Air Support, where we would have already planned a specific target area that we know our special forces or army colleagues on the ground are going to be operating, let's say, tomorrow. So we would pre-plan all of that, and then we would just sit fingers drumming, and if we then got called and they said, we are under heavy fire, we need somebody to come and give us some close air support, then we would launch pretty much instantaneously but we've already pre-planned the mission that we're doing thereafter. So no, it tends to be much pre-planned. And within the bigger NATO type missions, we actually have what we call a 72-hour planning cycle, where you end up planning missions that you're going to fly sometimes in 3 days' time. What I'm showing you here is how we train very much our UK pilots, and 3 hours is the minimum. You know, I would walk in as an instructor, and with 3 hours to take off, I will hand an ATO to the student and say, there's your task, crack on. And then I'll just sit back and wait and see what he does. And he'll have 3 hours to come up with a plan, to decide who was going to do what within the formation. It's great when you watch somebody trying to do everything himself, and then you go, right, you've got an hour, you've got an hour left. A bit like watching the Bake-Off finals and that on the TV, and you see them panicking towards the end, and you see that in training. But we teach them to do that because that's the minimum requirement that they're going to need. So it's rare that we would go with less than that. Stuff that you see that's no notice, it's not really no notice. We will have pre-planned it before, so we know where we're going and what we're going to be doing.
That was another question, maybe. So, yes, please.
How would you deal with the threat of drones?
How would I deal with the flight of drones?
How would he deal with the threat of drones?
The threat of drones.
Oh.
It's something that we're dealing with now. We've got typhoons out, obviously, in Akrotiri, and we've been threatened by drones coming over, and indeed drones have hit Akrotiri. The problem we have with drones is that the drone is probably 50 times cheaper than the missile I'm going to fire at it to take it out. So where possible, we would try to use something cheaper than a missile, so the gun, the cannon. Or there are other methods, and I'm not privy to exactly what they are because I'm not there now, but you know, we have electronic methods of taking down a drone. It's a radio-controlled aeroplane. If you can jam the link to the drone, you can defeat the drone. Can't do that with me as a pilot. We come back to that man in the cockpit. You know, you can't defeat me just by blocking my radio. I can still go and do my task. If I'm a drone and you can cut down the link from me and my operator, then I'm useless. So a lot of the sort of anti-drone warfare, if you want to call it that at the moment, is very much in the cyberspace using electronic kit, not just hard kill from aeroplanes. Looks good from an aeroplane, but it's not quite typhoons in World War II tipping the wing of a V1 rocket coming over with Doodlebug. So yeah, it's a difficult challenge and it's one that's growing.
Is this a last question, maybe? I don't know. But
How challenging is tuning out air refueling procedures?
We haven't got one in here. The air-to-air refueling basket on the back of a tanker is the size of a domestic bucket. And we're doing, normally on the tanker, 300 knots, so about 340 miles an hour. Fortunately, you're both doing 300 miles an hour, so the speed is relative. So the basket itself, they fill the hose with fuel, which makes it quite rigid, and it should stay quite stable. And the probe on, to take back to the Harrier days, probe on a Harrier is about here, it's just in my eye line, which is actually a pretty poor place to be. It'd be better if it was further back and I can't see it. So we'll come up behind the basket and we'll sit and we'll formate on the aeroplane. And as we move closer, we get to what we call a waiting position. And the challenge for us is that as you move your aeroplane forward, the wake around your aeroplane moves the basket. And it normally moves it away from you. So in most aeroplanes, particularly on the Harrier, I would sit with the basket almost right in front of my cockpit. And you sort of think, this is going to be interesting as I get closer. The guys in the tanker will have a series of lights, so it can all be done silent, and it's always done silent on and off. And they will sit there and you'll have a red light on, you're not allowed to touch the basket. And then they'll go to amber, and that's saying you're now cleared to contact the basket. And I will then drive forward, and hopefully if I've judged it just right, as it comes towards me, it will move out just a little bit, and I'll just feel a dunk, and I've got the probe in the basket, if I'm lucky. And we try to get in first time, obviously. I then push the basket in probably about 20 feet, and then the amber light will go green, and that's telling me that fuel's flowing. And then I'll sit and I'll take as much fuel as they'll give me, or until it starts flashing at me, which says, you've had enough, we're not giving you any more, back out. And then we'll back out of the basket and we'll let somebody else in. Problem on the tanker is when you arrive at night, there's a 4-ship, and your number 4's got less fuel than you, So you go, okay, you can take 1,000 kilograms, and I'm sat there doing mental dead reckoning, working out how much I can afford to let him get before I need him to back out, because all the time I'm sat on the wing waiting for him to prod, my fuel's going down and I'm looking at getting very short. So it's, you've had enough now, out my go. And if you watch a junior pilot and he's, say, fencing the basket, where every time he goes, basket moves and he's, oh, and you see the tailplane of the aeroplane doing this as he's trying to get this thing in, and it's relax, relax. So in that sense, the shorter you get a fuel, the more tense it gets. When you're sat there looking at your fuel gauge going, I need to divert shortly if I don't get any fuel, and that's embarrassing. So yeah, it's entertaining, shall we say, but it's, again, something that we train for. We would never send somebody out to do an air-to-air tanker sortie for real unless they've done a lot of tanking in the UK. And it's another thing that the guys have to practice and have to have a certain currency. And I don't know what the currency is for Typhoon, but you know, if they go out of currency, they won't be allowed to go off on an op and do anything that requires tanking unless they've actually got themselves recurrent before they go. Tankers are in short supply, so that's the other problem. You turn around and say, hey, there's 4 of us need to get a tanker sortie, and no tankers available today. We regularly bootleg them off the east coast and just call up on their frequency, say, anyone got any gas? You know, can I have some Texaco? And they'll either say, yeah, we can give you a bit. And it's more a question of just wanting to prod. You don't necessarily need to take much fuel and then come back after you've got it. But yeah, it can be a challenge.
Oh, it's like multi-dimensional chess. It's hard to imagine. I suppose the younger set, you know, are playing on game machines and so on. They're probably very adept at doing. I think for elderly people like me, it wouldn't really work.
I was going to say, there are techniques we, the old boys, used to get into the basket first time. The young boys, we would never teach them because it's not the way we want to do business. You know?
Wow.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Is that it? Questions on Zoom? Any more?
One more, actually.
Oh, okay.
Presuming that
Are you all right? Take
Yeah.
I'm thinking this is in the military context, Nigel, but it's what are your fears for the future?
What is?
Okay.
What are your fears for the future?
Oh, my fears for the future. Within the Air Force, I mean, not in terms of retiring to Patterdale and my electronic washing machine. I think my fears for the future are that we get so small that we go below a critical mass where we are unable to deliver what our public expects of us. It's never happened yet, but I think there are quite a few times where we're going, we're awfully close. We've had times where we have been pretty much fully deployed. And I think about when we were doing Iraq, Afghanistan, and Bosnia. In fact, I came back from Bosnia on the Friday afternoon and I deployed to Iraq on the Monday morning. Didn't have any time at home because we just didn't have any other pilots to go. And when you get to that sort of stage, you're going, we're working quite hard now. So I think my fear for the future is we become such a small force, we cannot deliver what's expected of us. And if we can't deliver what's expected of us, we fail. And I don't ever want to see the Royal Air Force fail.
On that note,
Yeah, another positive one.
no, it's just an extraordinary story. I mean, for me, I've been very touched by it because I don't really know you very well, but I'm so impressed by your professionalism and the whole sort of aura around the work you do and the brilliance of the RAF in meeting their goals. And I mean, here we are with the flags in this room, thinking, yeah, this is something that the British do rather well.
There's an awful lot of countries around the world who come to do their training with the Royal Air Force because we have such a fantastic reputation. And again, long may that continue.
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask you a question because, as you know, we collect donations. I hope people both online, but also people in this room will make a small donation to whatever charity you wish us to contribute to.
Macmillan. Macmillan, I think it's a fantastic charity. I like to do the Macmillan Mighty Hikes, both here, Peak District and Northumberland. And I think they're a very successful charity, but one that's an incredibly worthwhile cause. There are very few people that don't know the Macmillan Cancer Relief Charity.
Okay.
So yeah, any donations that we can have, I would put them towards Macmillan.
And you have the honourable record of raising more money for your last talk than any other talk we've had before. So congratulations. I'm sure that Macmillan are very happy to receive those resources. Just a bit of housekeeping. The next Friends of the Ullswater Way event is a field visit which is run by Cumbria Wildlife Trust on the 16th of May to visit an area of peatland which is being restored on Matterdale Common. If anyone is interested in joining, please let me know. It's only at the end of next week, so it's quite soon. So we'd like to have more people. Please let me know. And then a word on our next talk, which will take place on Thursday, the 4th of June.
I can't make it.
Yeah, sure. You're in my pocket for helping out every now and again. Yes, it will take place again in the Parkin Memorial Hall. And we have the pleasure of welcoming Councillor Giles Archibald from the West London Furness Council Cabinet member, who's responsible for climate change, biodiversity and environmental services, and also Steve Trotter, the CEO of the Cumberland Wildlife Trust. So we have a panel discussion, and the topic they're going to talk about is Cumbria's local nature recovery strategy. So they're the people who put the strategy together. I think it'll be fascinating to hear what they have to say to us. And then in the coming weeks, we'll be presenting some ideas of ways to celebrate Friends of the Ullswater Way's 10th anniversary, which is this year. In June, we'll launch with Ullswater's two main secondary schools, Queggs and UCC, and the Field Studies Council in Blencathra, an extension of our current water sampling, freshwater water sampling process in Ullswater. Basically, since October last year, we've been engaged in sampling the quality of the fresh water in Ullswater. I'm very glad to say that the quality is very good. It's excellent by European bathing quality standards, but you never know. I'm going to do some sampling with one of our colleagues next week to see whether it's still up to scratch. And we will also be publishing in the next few weeks some drone footage of the Wordsworth Way. You will see on our website, we've done drone footage of various walks around, including the Ullswater Way, around the site, and we've got the person who put that together to do the same thing for the Wordsworth Way, which will be fascinating to see the first samples of that we saw yesterday. We hope to actually put that on our website in the coming weeks. So, lots going on. I'd like to thank you once again, Nigel, for your fantastic presentation. Not sure what to say, really. I mean, yeah, sheer admiration with all your work, and I think as someone who lives here and witnesses your activities every day, I have to say you're in the inspiring camp rather than the, I said at the beginning, the awe camp, as opposed to the irritation of the noise. I think the noise we can put up with compared with the potential benefits that you bring. That's my personal view. So thank you very much again. Thank you.